Good afternoon and welcome to Volunteering Victoria's webinar series. I'm Sarah Sterling, our Sector Development Manager, and I'm pleased to be bringing you these webinars of volunteer managers talking about their experience in different facets of volunteer management. Before we go further, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land which we call Australia. Though we're likely logging on from different parts of Australia, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future from traditional custodians across the country. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our two guests. In the interest of all other listeners, please keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. You should have arrived on mute, but you should be able to check by hovering your mouse over the screen. There's a public chat box which will send messages or hellos to other participants, and feel free to introduce yourself. But if you have a question, we'd ask that you submit it through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will raise all of the questions that we get throughout the course of the webinar at the end. If you're having technical troubles, please either use the public chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll try and assist you with the technology. This webinar will be available for download on our website at the end of today. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guests, Emma Short and Amberly Jane, who will be chatting with me today about how they manage volunteers specifically for events. So Emma is the Volunteer Development Advisor for the Heart Foundation and has been since 2014. She's been in volunteer management for more than 12 years and ran the Homeless World Cup in 2008. Amberly is the National Events Volunteer Officer for Oxfam Trail Walker and has been since mid-2017. She's run 12 Trail Walker events thus far, and she's been involved in event management prior to that at Ticketek for 8 years, working across some of Melbourne's biggest venues. So welcome, Amberly and Emma. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right, so to kick the ball rolling, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your organisation? And we might kick it off with you, Emma.
Sure. So I'm Emma. Working for the Heart Foundation for 5-6 years now. I started off working there in the Victorian division, but recently in the last year, we've gone through a process of becoming one united whole heart across the whole country. And so, another webinar on structural change, possibly for all of us, because I think it's happening in the sector. So now I look after volunteer matters across the whole country. I love volunteering myself and have always done it, and that's how I got into being involved as a volunteer manager, which I actually don't want to get out of. I really enjoy it.
Wonderful. And how about you, Amberly?
So I've been with Trail Walker now for over 2.5 years, as you just mentioned. So I work specifically on that event and recruiting, scheduling and training volunteers for the Trail Walker event. So there's 4 different events usually each year in different states around Australia. The event itself did originate in Hong Kong back in 1981, and it's now happening in 11 different countries around the world, with 4 of those events in Australia. So I just focus on the Australia events. We have about 500 to 600 volunteers for each event. So about 2,000 a year that I'm working with along with my manager.
That is huge, and huge internationally. And I've just popped some photos of a recent trail walker. Maybe you can tell me which one it was, Amberly, up on the screen.
We might have had Sydney in there, but I also think, the photo that has all the volunteers dressed up in their onesies was from Perth, but the others are from Sydney and Melbourne. So we've got quite a mix in there.
Fantastic. So I'll leave those on the screen for just a little while longer for you guys to, see the joy that was that trail walker, particularly in Perth. And when we're doing these webinars, I actually really love to hear people's origin stories, how they got involved in volunteering or volunteer management, because I think we all come to the sector from such diverse backgrounds. So, Emma, where did you get started?
Actually, through working as a volunteer in events in Scotland back in the day when I lived there, and I was a bit lost, I think, and I wanted to do some different stuff with my time. And so I knew someone that ran adventure races, which involved people staying up for many days at a time, orienteering, kayaking, biking through the countryside. And I just saw it as a great opportunity to meet people from all over the world and see bits of my country that I'd never seen before, which I certainly did, and see people in states of sleeplessness that I will never forget. Quite amusing, and I loved it, absolutely loved it, and met lots of people through doing that. And then when I moved to Melbourne, I had a friend who worked for a similar organisation, and they took me on board to actually more customer service, but I ended up dealing mostly with the volunteer side of it. And they realised that they'd been doing it really badly because they were really amazing sports people, but not incredible community organisers, if you like. So they carved out a role for me, and I travelled all over Australia. So lucky me. Now I have to stick to the Docklands, but never mind. I still enjoy it. So that's how I got into it.
What a way to see multiple countries.
Absolutely.
So how about you, Emily?
So I first started volunteering when I was 13, which is quite young.
Very young.
At my local Red Cross op shop, which was a great experience. So I volunteered there 1 day a week, which I was able to do because I was homeschooled, so that kind of gave me a lot more flexibility. And that's something that I wanted to do with my time, and my mum was really supportive of that, and the lovely women at our local Red Cross shop just kind of took me under their wing. And yeah, it was a really great experience to learn a bit more about Red Cross, which I was already interested in at a young age, and I essentially just got to hang out at the op shop, learn how to, I guess, serve customers, a little bit of the working on the till and eat biggies with the ladies there. So that was a great way to start.
That sounds like a wonderful first volunteering experience. So diving right into today's topic, how would you say involving event volunteers is different from involving volunteers on an ongoing basis? And I'll flick to you first, Amberly.
So I think that a few of the key differences for me, I'd say the volunteers aren't as loyal as the volunteers you may have if they come in each week or on any sort of ongoing basis. So you do need to kind of create a community a lot quicker so they feel that they are as valuable as volunteers that are engaged with your organisation on an ongoing basis. But you also don't want to overwhelm them by making them feel that you're very dependent on them all at once and that you need them, and that you're going to, I guess, take all their energy in those few short hours or days that you need them for your event. So it's just trying to strike that balance about making them feel important and part of the community, but also letting them feel that they're needed. Overall, I think some of the other big differences are, of course, recruitment. You need a lot of people in a short period of time usually, and they're not going to actually get that ongoing engagement and support. So I guess you also need to see what the volunteer is going to get out of it, given that it's usually a very short sort of period of time that they're engaging with the organisation.
Yeah, that's great, and some really key differences highlighted there. How about you, Emma? How do you think they're different?
Yeah, well, I think Amberly's hit the nail on the head. Obviously, with an ongoing volunteer, someone who you get to know over time, you've got a lot more opportunity to build the relationship and understand their motivations and give them an opportunity to get a really valuable experience by understanding them more deeply. But you can't understand 1,000 people deeply at an event. So you kind of have to hope that what you're doing is giving them a meaningful opportunity, albeit a short one. And I think that's really the fundamental difference. And you've got an opportunity, definitely, to engage with these people and harness their energy and educate them about your organisation to some extent. But you got to, I guess, get it right, and you've got to make every little part of it something positive, really, because that might be the only time they ever have anything to do with Oxfam or Heart Foundation or whoever. And quite often, I think during events, staff are really stressed and worried about stuff. And I think it's really hard for them maybe to step back and go, yeah, but this person's here to help us. And, it's just another element of being a really skillful people person, dealing with that kind of thing, and understanding that just because there's hundreds of them doesn't mean that their question that they're about to ask you at the wrong time isn't something that's really important to them. So yeah, it's complicated and takes a lot of skill. And I have to say, I'm not doing it to the level that Amberley is now, but yeah, it's a really tough job. So hats off.
Absolutely. But I think, having that perspective on, how it feels to be a staff member managing volunteers for events specifically, and the kind of time pressures. You can't put it off till next week, or you can't put it off, for next year and get it right. You have to make sure that all of the elements are in place and all of the people are engaged at the one time. So that's great. Now, a common concept that we talk about is that volunteer life cycle, starting at position development and then recruitment, screening, orientation, training, reward and recognition, etc. Is there a part of the life cycle that you think is made easier or harder by there being event volunteers? I'll throw to you, Amberley.
I think one part that is a bit harder is keeping people engaged when they're not part of your event. So in that overall cycle, we have about 30% of our volunteers that are returning volunteers, and our event is only annually in each state. So for 30% to come back again and help out, we think that's a pretty good retention rate. But that does mean we're losing 70% of the volunteers that have volunteered before. And it's just hard trying to strike that balance between keeping those people engaged, but then we actually don't have a huge amount to offer them. So it's like, how are we engaging them and making it like valuable communication really in kind of what is our off season. So that's one part that we have found a little bit difficult. Another part for us is just the large amount of recruitment that we need. So many volunteers for a one weekend event. So recruitment in the lead up to an event is definitely our hardest time.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of stuff has to happen really, really quickly. So following on from that, I guess, and I'll throw to you, Emma. How have you found it helpful to keep volunteers engaged between events? In general, across your different experiences at the Homeless World Cup and at the Heart Foundation?
Well, the Homeless World Cup was a one-off, so it would have been probably very possible, because everyone absolutely loved being part of that. It was quite a unique experience, and I'm sure they would have come back the next year, of course, but I can't tell you.
Actually, you would have had 100% retention rate.
Definitely. But no, I have met people in parks across Victoria at campgrounds who said, "Are you Emma?" And years later, because they knew me, but I didn't know them because they were volunteers, and they tell me how much they enjoyed it and what it meant to them. And actually, some people have gone to other countries just to be part of the event as volunteers. Now, so I guess the event sells itself. Like, so if you love Trail Walker and you love seeing those parts of the world and getting involved with it, then you'll want to come back. But then other people, their life changes, they've, moved away, they've had a baby, they've done something else, whatever. And so you kind of have to take the good with the bad, I guess. And at the moment with the Heart Foundation, we've kind of stepped away a bit from doing sort of community-facing events per se. We're doing a lot of virtual events like the My Marathon campaign. So we do engage volunteers to help us in the office with that, but we don't have anything on the ground for them to do. So in many ways, it is a case of keeping your community engaged, full stop, not just to be volunteers, but to be engaged with the organisation. And that's a whole team of people in marketing and, media and social media, that are involved with that. It's not just us. And I think we need to remember that we are not all things to all people. The organisation has a lot of different skills to engage the Australian public in what it's doing. And if they are engaged, then they'll put their hands up to help you out the next time you need them.
Absolutely. And so, Amberly, did you have like specific strategies year to year, trail walker to trail walker?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a few things that we've trialled this year. So we have created a national Facebook group, just trying to connect a bit more with volunteers in that space. And that we I guess post information throughout the year, but also when an event is on, we ask them to share photos and stuff. Our event, as you can see, is very photogenic, so we do ask them to pop up some nice pictures in there. The volunteer management system that we use also has this fabulous option where we can trigger to send birthday emails to everyone. So all of our volunteers need to register with a date of birth for insurance purposes. And this system, I've literally just written a template of one email, and now every volunteer out of all of the however many thousands gets an email on their birthday, and they feel quite lovely and very special with that. And I've had a few people actually respond and just they feel like it's personalized from me, which is really wonderful. It's not quite like that. We also send Christmas cards. So we have a fabulous volunteer in our Brisbane office that hand writes hundreds of Christmas cards. And that's pretty much the main thing that she does for us. So this lovely lady comes in and almost every week will write Christmas cards, and then we post them all out. And that's just, people really appreciate, I think, that kind of just personalized approach, even though it's not from us, but it's from the organisation overall. And then we're about to send out some other emails at the moment to all of our volunteers around the country, just letting them know that we have a partnership with Cirque du Soleil, and they're about to have events later on this year and early next year. And a couple of their shows, they're actually going to donate a percentage of the profits to Ofsted. So we're just letting volunteers know that that is happening, and if they're interested, they can kind of go along to those shows. I guess we're always looking for new content to share with our volunteers. We want to make it relevant, but we also, if we can just have a bit more content, that would be great. So if anyone else has any other opportunities that they think we should share, we're happy to look into that as well.
Great. No, that's, you presented such a range of strategies of trying to keep people engaged with the organisation, which is great. So moving on to another, everybody's most happy part of the volunteer life cycle, risk and insurance, which you very helpfully led into, Amberly, talking about birthdays, is a huge deal, and particularly during events, and I imagine particularly in Trail Walker when you're in kind of remote parts of Victoria. So I guess I'm keen to understand whether you had special requirements for WH&S and insurance, and if you could give us a little bit more information about that.
Okay, so this is a big question, essentially. We have between 35 to 45 different volunteering roles for each of our events. So our volunteers are asked to do very different things depending on the role that they've selected, and they do select their role themselves when they register online. So it really depends on what they're registering to do as to how we need to make sure that they're prepared for that role. So we have some roles where volunteers do need to do a lot of manual handling, and there is information about that at each of the event sites. We have roles where volunteers will be walking past the trail, and they need to be like the right level of fitness, the right fit for that role. So that kind of, I guess we vet the volunteers to a point to make sure that they're right for those roles. We also then have a whole in-house legal team, risk managers, and all of that are very involved in our event. It's been running in Australia for 20 years now, so we have a pretty good reputation overall, and a really good framework of how we actually measure the risk of an event. And we have some experts that are really dedicated to doing just that. So my team and the rest of the Trail Walker operations team listen to those experts. We have a risk meeting about 4 days before each event, and that's really a yes or no meeting. And that meeting goes through everything from the weather that's expected that weekend, the amount of volunteers that we have, and if that's a high risk situation. And then we kind of make it a decision at the end of that meeting. So that's really only the week of the event that we decide if we think everything is okay for us to proceed. And so we listen to the advice that we get from our risk team in regards to that. I think that's probably, does that sum it up?
Yeah, no, that's
go on and on.
there is a lot involved there, but considering every angle and considering the I guess safety of your volunteers, it sounds like Oxfam takes that really, really seriously.
Yeah, well, we do have volunteers that may be like volunteering, as you mentioned, out in the bush. It might be 2 a.m, and they may be with only 1 or 2 other volunteers. So it is a really high risk situation. So we do need to make sure that they're feeling supported and that we have put them in a space where we have calculated the level of risk that they're in.
Absolutely. Now, I'll throw to you, Emma, if you have anything else to add, though it sounds like one of the most comprehensive risk management procedures I have heard.
Yeah, I think Amberly's obviously what I was, going to say is that you need to ask for help with this stuff, because there are people that love working in the risk and the insurance space, and it might not be you. So, make sure that you either find someone in your own organization or another organization that can give you a hand with it. Because it's not worth the risk doing it without knowing what you're doing, I guess. And I mean, just depending on the types of events that people are running, like the Homeless World Cup was staged in Federation Square. So the venue itself will have its own team of people in matrix and so on that they want to satisfy. So it can be really complicated and many levels involved, depending on the type of event that you're running. And I know it's not black and white, in the Heart Foundation, we might have some level of, talking to someone, getting their personal details, that's more risky than someone out there wearing the happy heart suit and dancing around, although that's a different risk. That's, you could overheat. So, there's so many things you need to think about, and depending on what's going on. And I think that's the trickiness of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And certainly risk in considering it in relation to events is so much more complex than considering the risk, for an office volunteer or an ongoing program volunteer where they're super familiar with their tasks.
Yeah, that's right.
So turning our attention to recruitment, I mean, as we talked about earlier, there are heaps of volunteers to be recruited, often in a really short time frame. So I'm curious to know, what lead times you guys have worked on, particularly for the larger events, and, how you've approached that. I'll throw to you first, Emma, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I remember very well with the Homeless World Cup, I think I was employed in the June or July, and the event was in December, and they said we needed 300 volunteers. And then when I sort of was there for 2 weeks feeling sick because it was such a big event, I discovered it was more like 1,000 volunteers, and we had huge amounts to get through because some of the roles involved working with vulnerable people, and so some of the roles needed a lot of screening, and I got my own little army of volunteers into the office to help with it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And I think we'll touch on it later. Technology is involved as well, because these days, you can have a lot of good systems that will get people signed up as far as they can go without, the police checks and whatever. So you can cut out a lot of the paperwork and the backwards and forwardsing. But yes, I think it depends on the amount of screening and the risk involved and the roles that people are going to have. So you need to look at each category of event volunteer and say, right, I need, 100 of those, and that's low risk. So, you know, that's not something that we need to work on now, but I really need to get in the 50 or so people that are going to be in these supervisory positions or so on. So yeah, it's planning it out and looking at those levels of engagement and responsibility.
Great, yeah. It really just requires so much planning is what I keep coming back to when I think events, and it is not something in my particular skill set. How about you, Amberly? What type of lead times do you guys have at Oxfam?
So we generally start recruiting for trail walker volunteers 100 days before an event. So that's our go-to. If everything's running smoothly, which it often isn't, but if everything is running smoothly, we launch 100 days before the event. And by launching, we start engaging with our past volunteers. So they always get first pick. So we would email all of them and say, this is how you can access the website, these shifts are available, and then they can go in and select their own shifts. So we do that for all of our past volunteers and past groups. So we have a lot of corporate groups, university groups, and community groups as well. So say like rovers and provers, things like that. So we kind of launch out to those volunteers first, 100 days before the event. Then they get a few weeks to kind of decide the shifts that work for them. They're often the people as well that will bring along friends. So we want to make sure that they're having their preferred shift, really. Of course, our event is a fundraising event, as a not-for-profit. So the overall aim of Trail Walker is to engage walkers who then fundraise for the event. So once registration for walking closes, we can then also target that pool. So that closes about 8 weeks before the event. And then anyone who has expressed interest in walking but hasn't actually signed up, we can target and ask them if they want to volunteer. So that kind of opens up a whole another area for us. So pretty much from 8 weeks before the event, we start emailing everyone we possibly can. We make sure that our website is live and open to anyone that logs onto it. We start sending out SMS campaigns. We also have paid ads, different free advertising through all the different jobs groups that we can go with. And anything else that we can think of, essentially. We put postcards in op shops. There's been a bit of community radio and stuff. So pretty much anything else that we can, we will try for an event.
Awesome. That's great.
I will just echo what Emma was saying in regards to kind of the categories of screening. And we have quite a hierarchy of our volunteers. Mentioned the nicest way possible, we do need some volunteers that are very experienced that are doing niche roles, and we will focus on filling those roles as a priority. And then you'll have your more sort of general support volunteers, and we just hope to fill them as we get a bit closer to the event. So you do need to have that lens as well as to what you're actually recruiting for and prioritising those roles that are a bit more important.
No, great. That's really, really helpful. So moving on to technology and management, do you guys have a management system? Is it different for your event volunteers as your ongoing volunteers?
So for the Homeless World Cup back in those days, we got a software company to build us a rostering system from scratch. I think they thought we could do it on bits of paper, but I said we couldn't. So so that was then 2008. But now, I mean, Heart Foundation is implementing Better Impact as I speak, and we will be able to use that. But interestingly, I found out about a little rostering system that's free. So for any really small organizations out there, actually at my son's school, where they were rostering on parents for Mother's Day stall, and it's called Sign Up, and it works really, really well for something simple like that, you know. So you don't always have to buy something or have something fancy in place. You don't always have to rely on Excel spreadsheets either.
That is such a good point. As much as we love Excel.
As much as we love it. So yeah, there are definitely opportunities out there, and I think you know, getting some support from Volunteering Victoria and the various networking groups so that you know who's using what and what works for the sort of event that you've got coming up. I would advise that that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and how about you, Amberly? What do you guys use?
So at Oxfam, we of course have our office volunteers, and they are managed by using Better Impact. But in the event volunteer space, we actually use a system called Volunteer Local. It's not as well known as Better Impact, and it is a bit more focused on event volunteers. When I started in the role, I think we had 4 different spreadsheets, and you had to kind of work across these different spreadsheets. It was just quite cumbersome. So we've been using Volunteer Local for about 2 years, and I think that's just fabulous. It's based in the States. The team are quite small. I think it's mainly 3 people that work there and have kind of launched this program. And they're super receptive to any criticisms or suggestions that I have of the system. I guess given that they're a smaller team, our event is really large and quite difficult. And anytime I've suggested something to them that I think would be great to have within their program, they've actually tried to change it and put that new add-on there. So that's really lovely that they kind of customized the system for us quite a lot. So
That's
I'm very happy with that.
That's wonderful. And it is so, it is just worth pointing out that the difference between 2008 and currently in terms of what is available in terms of the technology, it's just chalk and cheese. And I'm sure it'll, you know, continue evolving and continue getting better and hopefully continue getting, you know, more cost effective. Although, you know, it's a really good point, Emma, to sing out those type of free systems because, you know, organisationally, sometimes you definitely do need to work around and find ways to do things for cheap. So I'm just going to skip ahead one question and talk about reward and recognition for volunteers. And, you know, I guess how is this different from your ongoing reward and recognition? And, you know, I'll throw to you, Emma, first.
Well, I always think about it from what do I want if I'm going to turn up to an event to volunteer, whether it is the Mother's Day stall at school or something else. And, you know, to be honest, I have turned up to something sometimes and people haven't even maybe looked at me in the eye and said, thank you for coming. My name's such and such. So I mean, it's just simple things that we have to remember that, you know, to recognize that someone's taking the time to come in and help you and to really give them a little bit of your concentration and time initially is so important. But I'm sure everyone on this call already knows that. So ensuring that there's obviously a thank you afterwards to acknowledge their input. And sometimes you could be lucky, you might have sponsors or budgets that might enable you to give them some small token of a gift. But really for me, I don't think a lot of people want you to spend a lot of money when you're a non-profit organization. So time, and also you could think about it in terms of, you know, what else have you got to offer, whether it be, you know, some kind of learning experience that's coming up that people might be interested in, or just, you know, an opportunity like Amberly was talking about to be the first in to get your best shift next time. You know, that's a way of recognizing someone for doing it once and getting them back again. So there's many different ways of doing it, but really being present and human with the people, I think, is the main thing.
Yeah, it does make a difference if you're giving up your Saturday afternoon to really feel like someone is listening to you and someone is going to have you back if you have concerns or questions, for sure. So how do you guys approach reward and recognition at Trail Walker?
I think just touching on what Emma was saying then, being human is really important, and you can often get a bit caught up in things when you're at an event and everything's a bit manic, it's all a bit crazy, and you might be a little bit less graceful in those moments. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge all of your event volunteers and just look them in the eye and say thank you, and that in itself is just really, really valuable. As shown in the photos before, our volunteers they're pretty hard to miss. So they are all asked to wear like these bright green vests or purple vests depending on their roles. And so we have a staff briefing, usually the night before an event, and we may have about 50 staff that work on the events, and all of those staff will be reminded whenever they are out and they see volunteers to thank them, just to say thanks. You know, nothing else is really needed in that moment. But if the staff can just take a moment to acknowledge what the volunteers are doing for us, we think that's really, really valuable. We are lucky enough to have a sponsor that does give us a budget to provide a gift for each of our volunteers. This year and last year, it was a kit cup that we chose to put that money towards. But I know in the past there's also been T-shirts and hats and caps and all sorts of things. We do have some of our long-term volunteers that will have a little collection of all this merchandise now. And just the other week, I saw someone with a long sleeve shirt from 2001. And so that was quite impressive that he showed up with his shirt that's almost 20 years old and he was still wearing it. So it is really great if you have any sort of relationships with some other sort of stakeholders, just see how you can kind of capitalize on that essentially. And it might just be like something within your local community. It could be a discount at a restaurant or something like that. If they're going to support you and they can offer something for your volunteers, I think it's the intention really goes a long way. We also have a celebration night event, which is for all of our staff and walkers and the volunteers. And that happens about a month after the trail walk event itself. It's just a way to say thank you to everyone. We have some awards. We have three to four award categories for volunteers, and we just give them a bit of a certificate and a small gift. So that's really what we're doing to thank our volunteers. There's always room for improvement though, but they're the main things that we're doing at the moment.
Absolutely. So we'll just maybe cover two more questions before we throw it out to people online. So if you have any questions you want to ask Emma and Amberly, please feel free. For the first time ever, we got some questions emailed in prior to the webinar, so we'll address those at the end as well. So I guess I wanted to go back to kind of that sense of communication with your volunteers, and what types of communication do you have to use as a volunteer, an events volunteer manager, and I guess how do you create that sense of community over a day or two? You both alluded to it a little bit in the past, but there is some deliberation in terms of that. So I'll throw to you, Amberly.
Okay, so I have touched on a couple of things here. So one being a Facebook group. I guess for us, Facebook is free, so that's been really good for us to use. A lot of people do use that platform. It's not so foreign, but we also need to be mindful that it doesn't appeal to everyone. It's not going to reach all of our volunteers. So that's just a sort of side project, I guess. We do send out emails, like recruitment emails, and then we also have emails that we send once our volunteers are registered to kind of welcome them, let them know where they can access further information, when our training is happening, if they need to attend training. So we kind of have two streams of emails constantly running, one that's recruiting new volunteers and the other that's feeding information to people that have registered to volunteer. Alongside that, we also will send out SMS text messages, and we found that people do respond quite well to that. We just need to time them at the right time of day, and then that does seem to really break through a lot of the clutter. Emails these days, you can get bombarded with emails, but if you can send a text message to someone, then that actually we found does get quite a good response rate. We do require our volunteers to give us a mobile phone number, and that's because they are often out in the bush, sometimes overnight, and so we need to be able to contact them. So having access to that has allowed us to be able to actually text them, which is great.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that, you know, ability to check in and the different ways that you can touch base with people, because it can be so easy in a sea of emails or a sea of Facebook notifications to lose that. So it's, you've provided a lot of strategies for kind of building community. What another question we'll address is just, do you guys look at, I guess, the different demographics that you have in your volunteer team when you're trying to recruit potential event volunteers? And I guess, if so, how do you target different groups, particularly when you have those really highly specialised roles? And I'll throw to you, Emma.
Yeah, sure. Well, that was one of the main parts of the recruitment process for Homeless World Cup, because we had these team liaison officers. So these teams were coming from all over the world, and they didn't all speak English, and we really needed to be careful about who we recruited into those team liaison officer roles. And we reached out to Melbourne's an amazing hot pot of different communities, and they all, pretty much all have their own representative groups, and you can link in with those people. And they were absolutely delighted to be asked to get involved, and it was just such a rewarding thing to do, to find the people that spoke the right language and had the right knowledge about cultural issues, and recruit from there. So same with the Heart Foundation. Quite often, if we're not necessarily working on big events, but smaller events where we actually really recognise that some of the most vulnerable and at-risk communities are those that we don't really represent ourselves in the office necessarily. So we work hard to reach out to those different cultural groups in the community and say, would you like to help us to deliver presentations or deliver a small event for your community to raise the awareness about heart disease and so on. And if we don't do that, then we're not, servicing the whole community. So it's really, really important, and it takes a little bit of work, but it's very rewarding and worth doing, and it's really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. How about you, Amberly? And please send in any questions you have for Emma and Amberly, because we'll go to questions from the virtual audience in a second.
So I had a bit of a look into our different type of demographics before I came in here today. Just to give an example, the youngest volunteer that we had out at Trail Walker this year was a 16-year-old, and the oldest was 81. And that didn't surprise me at all. Like, we have people of all different ages, backgrounds, and experience that will come and help us out. The majority of our roles don't require any sort of experience or special knowledge, but we do have a couple of key roles where we do need to make sure that we have the right fit for that job. Some of those roles are where we have volunteers that will walk sections of our trail. They need to have a high level of fitness and really be quite passionate about being out in the bush and being very comfortable with that. We never want to give a volunteer a role that they actually aren't quite the right fit for. We do also have allied health support. So we'll have massage, podiatry, and physio volunteers. And we, of course, need to make sure that they are the right sort of qualified for that stream. And we have students from those allied health platforms as well that will come and support us. So they need to be the right fit too. I guess we try to be aware of what volunteers we're seeking and making sure that we're getting the right match. With the system that we use, we have the ability to create volunteer jobs on our website and put a password on them and just hold them for the right groups. So for our Brisbane event, a lot of that is in really rugged bush, and it can only be accessed with four-wheel drive. So we actually have a four-wheel drive club that we partner with, and they take care of all of that side of things. And of course, it's not going to work for someone that isn't comfortable or has the right experience and skills to be driving a four-wheel drive. So that's kind of a very niche example. So we just try to really make sure that we are matching the right volunteers with the right roles. And I think that's allowed our demographic to just be very broad, because we can kind of get almost anyone and fit them in somewhere.
Great. No, it's really, I think, a comprehensive look at, it's really nice to reflect on who your volunteers are and how that matches both your skills needs identified, but how that matches the community that you're serving. So we'll go to the questions that were emailed earlier on, and it's really, I guess, a little bit of a similar question. Basically, do volunteers have to register and screen for each different event? Is the screening the same for volunteers who are participating in a once-off event or an ongoing program events? And do you have a pool of pre-screened volunteers? So I'll throw to you, Amberley.
Okay, so this is always a topic that people want to chat about, is screening event volunteers. So as I mentioned, we have about probably a minimum of 500 volunteers for each of our events. There's no way we could possibly screen that many people to the level that some places may go as far to do. But in researching kind of what we do and coming up with where we're at now, our volunteers don't really have access to any sort of confidential information or any sort of private information when they're out there. They don't necessarily need to be vetted. There's no need for a working with children's check because they're not working with any children out there. So we have kind of sought them advice, I guess, from our in-house team, but also from Justice Connect and a few other places to make sure that we're covering everything we need to be doing. Our office volunteers, they do need to complete a police check as they have access to our computer systems. That then gives them potential access to credit card records and stuff like that when we get donations. So office volunteers and event volunteers are definitely managed in two completely different ways when it comes to the screening of them.
And so if volunteers return for an event, they, I guess don't need to be pre-screened because they often have pretty minimal screening requirements by the sound of things.
Exactly. We do have a disclaimer or a waiver that we ask volunteers to agree to, and they need to do that each year. And that's pretty much just saying that they will conduct themselves in a certain manner that's appropriate while they're out there. It also says that they must be over 16 years of age. We do not have any children that volunteer. Those between 16 and 18 must be with a guardian at all times, and that's always an area that we're really strong on. But yeah, beyond that, we don't really need to screen too much. We do have some volunteers that are couriers for us. They must be over 25 years of age and have a full driver's license, and we will cite that before they actually start their shift. They've also asked to provide that information in advance, but we'll also actually cite the driver's license to make sure that that's still current and valid. Yeah.
Great. Emma, did you have anything to add on that particular one?
Well, I say borrowed or pinched the team's idea of having a matrix of screening. And so, they have this kind of, if doing this, then that, blah, blah. So I just did one for volunteers as well. So I often refer to that and obviously keep it up to date and adjust it. And, recently I was asked to get a number of volunteers in for a day to do some phone calls, and it was to potentially take down people's details. So, they are being screened really heavily, even though it's a one-off event. But someone who's out there handing out water at Run Melbourne is not being screened very heavily. So, yeah, you have to really, again, put a bit of thought into the risk and what is required. And also get someone above you to sign it off, so that it's not you that's making that call if you're not comfortable with it or if you feel like you're not absolutely sure. Talk it through with someone and they'll say, well, what are the risks? And yeah.
Absolutely, and I think this is a pretty sharing sector. So find an event that's very similar, connect up with a colleague in the sector, and potentially ask them what their current screening requirements and risk evaluations are. So with that, I guess we'll address. There's a question that's come in about what the standard screening procedures are that you guys recommend, whether it's a police check, a reference check, copy of a driver's license. And I think my response, and I imagine the girls' response, is that it depends on the role. You're going to have a varied level of screening, so you're going to have to have a great system to track who's put their hand up for what role.
Yeah, and I think just be open to being adaptable, because what we've done this year may not be right for next year. So just you've got to always be mindful of how the legal system is changing and making sure that you are meeting all the correct requirements, but then just tailoring it each time to the actual job itself and what you're asking the volunteer to do.
Absolutely. So another question's come in just around how long after an event volunteer has been inactive do you exit them from the system or communications? Do you guys have a policy around how long you'll leave someone in the system, or do you never take people off once they give their details to the Heart Foundation or Oxfam? They can never click unsubscribe. Do you guys have a policy?
Now, I'm not sure what our actual policy is. However, there's a big difference between unsubscribing someone and removing them from the system at Oxfam. So people can stay on the system, but they can be unsubscribed from things. And that just means if they come back and they may walk one of our events, or they may give a one-off donation to something, then we still have some sort of record to track where they may have engaged before. And so we can see that someone had volunteered 5 years ago, and this year they've made a once-off donation to an earthquake appeal. And that's just useful for us sometimes to see how we can better tailor the communication going to that person. We may still send out communications to try and target someone to come back as a volunteer as much as 5 years later. If they have asked us to cease that communication, of course we will. They cannot unsubscribe from our emails if they're registered for a current event. So usually the 3 months before an event, if they're volunteering with us, we have a lot of safety information in those emails, so they actually need to keep getting that information until the event is passed.
No, it's a really good point. Did you guys have a policy or a system at the Heart Foundation, Emma?
Well, in terms of contacting people in general, yes. And I guess people will unsubscribe themselves from the general communication. And I don't go past about a year or two ago. But as Amberly says, these days, Big Brother is watching, and we have an organisation that has a way of having a view of everyone that's involved with us, so that we know when we call them up for whatever reason, their involvement with us. So yeah, it's an interesting time in this day and age, because no one wants to let go of people and their information.
Absolutely. And everybody who has ever interacted with an organisation is a potential volunteer. They just don't know it. Does anyone else have any more questions coming through on the system? I'll give you 1 more minute and just flag that in an unusual move, we are having a webinar again next week in conjunction with our Victoria Alive project around supporting volunteers with disability in your organisation. And again, a little bit of a break from our usual format of having 2 volunteer managers. We've got a volunteer manager and someone who she's supported with a disability in her organisation, talking about what's really worked in their workplace context. And that was a webinar that was due to happen in June, but was unscheduled due to unforeseen circumstances, rescheduled. And we've just had one 11th hour question. So thank you, and thank you all for the engagement. This has been really great. Someone's just asked, do you have separate communication for ongoing volunteers at your organisation versus your event volunteers? I think I would be fair to say,
100%.
Yeah. And I guess that just really speaks to their engagement with the organisation is totally different. So the way you would tailor that communication is completely different. Did either of you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
I would just add that I'm very open if anyone else is interested in, if there's any other questions that come up after this, I'm very happy to talk to anyone about event volunteers beyond today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likewise. So thank you all for signing on, and this webinar will be made available on the Volunteering Victoria website. I'd really like to thank Amberly and Emma for their time and expertise today and sharing their pearls of wisdom. Yeah, thank you all and have a wonderful Thursday afternoon.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.